Hello and welcome to another episode of Nutrition Essentials, a side project of our popular Health Essentials podcast. I'm John Horton, your co-host with registered dietitian Julia Zumpano.
Hey John, today's topic is very fascinating. We're going to talk about intestinal rehabilitation.
Julia, gut rehab is one of those treatments that just doesn't get a lot of attention. And that's probably because it's used to help just a small group of people who are dealing with intestinal failure. It's one of those things that's just not that common and not that well known, but we're about to learn a lot more about it.
And that's why we brought on our guest, Dr. Donald Kirby. He's the medical director of the Center for Human Nutrition at the Cleveland Clinic. He's going to tell us all about what he does.
Julia, it's worth noting that Cleveland Clinic has one of the largest and most comprehensive programs in the world when it comes to treating intestinal failure. So let's find out a little bit more about the life-changing work being done there and how they're using nutrition to get that job done. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kirby. We have really been looking forward to you dropping in to chat.
Well, thank you.
So I have to tell you, I know we've all watched medical shows where a close-to-death patient meets a charming doctor and gets put on a new treatment that brings just miraculous results. The sort of moment when a person in a wheelchair rises up and starts walking again. I watched an interview with you where you talked about that sort of Hollywood drama being a real-life reality in your office, thanks to gut rehabilitation. That is just some amazing stuff to have as just part of your workday.
It is true. People come in extraordinarily weak, malnourished, and hardly able to do anything during the course of a day. And once they go through intense and nutritional rehabilitation, and it takes a village to actually complete all that stuff, it really is very rewarding and very miraculous to see people. The human body is just amazing. And there's a lot of things that we can do to help people that have bad intestinal failure and short bowel syndrome, things that we're going to talk about in this wonderful segment.
Well, thank you so much for what you do, Dr. Kirby. And just for the audience, can you tell us in brief words what intestinal failure is?
Intestinal failure is a term that really is not well appreciated in the United States. That's something that Europeans actually are far ahead of us in defining this and figuring out what it is. Most people understand what heart failure is or kidney failure and what dialysis is, but what's intestinal failure? So intestinal failure basically means that for whatever reason, and we'll talk about causes, your gut does not have the wherewithal to do the two processes that it really needs to do. You need to first digest food that you eat, but then the important part is absorbing it. And if you can't do that, then bad things happen. And we are now 50 years into being able to do intravenous nutrition. Formerly, people before the early 1970s, people would go for an operation and the surgeon would say, "Hey, you did great." And then they would not be able to survive from a nutritional standpoint because they had so much gut resected that they couldn't really, either from a nutritional standpoint or fluids and electrolytes, maintain a normal balance. So intestinal failure is basically what it sounds like. Your gut doesn't do what it needs to do.
Dr. Kirby, it's one of those things, I don't think we appreciate what our gut is doing for us all the time. It's just one of those parts that just kind of works for us. And you really brought home, we talk on here all the time about the importance of eating certain foods to get nutrients. And if you're not absorbing it correctly through your gut, it's kind of wasted there. You're not getting what you need.
So true.
Yeah. And it's amazing the advancements that we've made in that area. I mean, just thinking that only 50 years ago we started IV nutrition, and how essential that is in the healing of the gut and meeting all our nutrient needs for these specific patients, but other patients as well, ideally if it can be used on the short term.
And if you're very lucky if it's used in the short term. And
Right.
that may be someone that goes in for an operation, they may have an ostomy placed, and the surgeon says, hey, you may need this for 3 to 6 months before I can go back in and hook you back up. Simple plumbing, really, not so simple. But once they get put back together, they don't need the IVs anymore. So that's really short-term intestinal failure with a really good ending.
Now, when we talk about the long term, the people with the really serious intestinal failure, this is a relatively small number of people that we're talking about, correct?
Absolutely. So we actually in this country don't know the absolute number of people that are on IV nutrition at any one time because that goes up and down. And the way we do healthcare isn't like many of the small countries in Europe where the government pays for everything. So they know exactly how many people are on IV nutrition at any one time, or tube feeding for that matter. In this country, it's a mishmash of what we can get from some of the hospitals or the insurance companies, maybe Medicare. So we think that there are somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people that are on chronic IV nutrition. And yeah, that's a really small number compared to a lot of other things that we deal with in medical history here.
I know that there's many ways that folks can get intestinal failure. You mentioned surgery, surgical disasters. Can you tell us a little bit about how the various kinds of ways someone may develop intestinal failure?
So there are lots of causes that people can get intestinal failure or what's called short bowel syndrome. So what's the difference? Well, intestinal failure is really defined by the need for either IV hydration or IV nutrition. But the big thing here is you need intravenous help. If you don't need intravenous help, but you've got a damaged gut, so to say, that might be what's termed intestinal insufficiency. But the different causes, you may have a tumor, there may be trauma, inflammatory bowel disease. We know that Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, patients that suffer from those disorders often end up having a surgery, and the surgeon goes in and has to take out a piece of bowel. Well, it may be more than just a piece. And that function may end up being that they've had so many surgeries or such a pervasive surgery that their bowel isn't enough to maintain them either for fluids and electrolytes or for nutrition in general. People that go for bariatric surgeries, we think that, that's great. People help the obesity epidemic by doing a surgery or doing medications these days. If you've had a surgery, you can have something go wrong with that surgery. While it's a minority of those patients, when it happens, it can be absolutely life-altering and terrible. There can be blood clots to various places within the GI tract that cause death to portions of the bowel, and if they're not removed, the patient dies. So what's left is someone who does not digest or absorb well, and they can't maintain themselves. So surgical issues are probably the most important. I'm in an inflammatory bowel hospital. We see so many patients with inflammatory bowel that have had so many different surgeries. We now have a lot of great drugs to help with inflammatory bowel disease, but we haven't always had those. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a real uh, wonderful explosion of medications as we understand the types of problems that these autoimmune diseases cause. And do you actually have to have bowel removed to have intestinal failure? And that answer is no. There are a couple of causes where we still have to support them with either IVs or IV nutrition. And that might be refractory celiac disease, people that are gluten sensitive that even when they follow an absolutely gluten-free diet, they don't get well. And that's a very small minority of those patients, but that does happen. And then there's another thing that's called chronic intestinal pseudoobstruction. And basically, think about your car. If your car doesn't have a motor, guess what? You're not moving. Likewise, if your motor of your GI tract doesn't work, you're not going to be able to be hydrated or be able to keep up with your nutrition. So patients like that end up needing help. And then there's some pediatric causes that I've never seen because I'm an adult gastroenterologist, but what's called the mucosal tufting disease, where the lining of the small bowel is just unusable and does not really absorb. And those people either need to be on long-term intravenous nutrition, or the other thing that we do here at the Cleveland Clinic, we're one of the few centers in the United States that does intestinal transplant. An intestinal transplant is the least transplanted organ in the body. We do 300 to 500 livers a year, heart transplants, kidney transplants, lung transplants. But if we do 10 to 15 bowel transplants in a year, that's considered a lot.
That'll help people on their next trivia night. That's always good to have those sort of bits of knowledge in there. So, I mean, Dr. Kirby, you obviously just laid out a bunch of different avenues that can kind of lead people to this place you really don't want to go. Is there anything? Are there any prevention strategies, or is it just it's just these kind of things happen in these unusual circumstances, and it just kind of leads you toward intestinal failure?
Great question. All I got to say is people don't wish themselves to have intestinal failure or short bowel.
Yeah.
It's something that happens to them, whether it's from a surgical aspect or the other non-surgical diseases that I just mentioned. So it may happen over time. You may have a disease like Crohn's disease where you've had several surgeries where you've had little bits and pieces removed at a time, but over time, you can't add that up and survive on your own. So
that all makes sense.
Yeah.
When I was in Virginia, we used to call it Whitland syndrome. The surgeon would go in there and say, I took a piece of bowel about that big, and gee, it came right back where I put it together. So I went back in and I took a big piece and kept doing it and kept doing it. And then they had to send them to me to give them IV nutrition. So it's not something that we're really thrilled about seeing this type of patient, but it's important because we take nutrition for granted. How many times a day do people put things into their body? You enjoy your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, Thanksgiving coming, but many of those patients can't really enjoy those holidays as well because the gut just doesn't work as well.
I think we commonly overlook that, when we us as healthy individuals, take for granted the things that work so well, just like if you break your leg or break your foot and then you're really recognizing how much you utilize that. But when you think about the gut, is not something we often think about if we have a healthy gut. And Dr. Kirby, you mentioned those with IBD. I think irritable bowel disease, I think it's also important, to highlight the management of that, good management. And if you have IBD or know someone that does, a family member, friend, just making sure that they're getting the best treatment options there too, to be able to, extend their healthy gut situation as long as possible.
Right. So there are resources. There are a number of intestinal rehabilitation centers scattered around the country. Unfortunately, they're not in every state, and they're often busy. But there are other resources like the Oley Foundation, OLEY, and they help people that have either tube feeding or IV nutrition, and they're a great resource. So people feel very alone, that they think that they're the only people in their neighborhood that's got a gut problem. And then these chat rooms or these other areas that they can find online are very helpful.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned treatment options, because we've been talking about the problem so far, and let's take a turn to the optimistic side here and talk about what we can do or what can be done to help people, get that gut functioning again. So when somebody comes in and they have intestinal failure, where do we kind of see treatment start?
Well, one of the first things I want to do is assess what's going on with the kidneys, because what's really disturbing to me is a lot of these people may have an operation and then they're not doing well from a fluid and electrolyte standpoint, and they go to the emergency room again and again and again, and their potassium's low, their magnesium's low, or they're dehydrated, or now they've got an acute renal failure. So I want to make sure that those kidneys are happy and healthy, because those kidneys are smarter than we are. So it's important to make sure those kidneys are happy and getting enough fluid. And then we do what we do best. We start working as a team, and I work with a whole host of absolutely wonderful registered dietitians and nurses to work on what we do. And the first thing we do is we talk about diet, because diet is really important. And it's a major change for a lot of these people that we start decreasing the amount of fat that they eat. We may increase their carbohydrates, and it all depends on what the anatomy is, because if we know what the anatomy is, we can predict what problems they're going to get into, and that helps to fuel what we choose to tell them and counsel them on what the best diet is for them. So we work very hard on that. And one of the biggest things and hardest things for people to understand is that lowering the amount of free sugar, all those sweets, or soda. And the second thing after diet that we really work on is fluids, because we want people to be able to absorb those fluids. And I liken water in many of these cases to like liquid plumber. It clears out those pipes. If you've got an ostomy bag, suddenly your ostomy may be full, or you're in the bathroom a lot because from the time you're 2 years old, your mom's telling you, drink water to make sure you don't get dehydrated. Well, great advice if your gut's normal. But if your gut isn't normal, then it's going to cause other problems. So we work on helping them. A little salt, little sugar gets absorbed very, very nicely. It's called oral rehydration solutions. These are predicated on what happened with the World Health Organization many years ago with cholera. Cholera is a disorder, a diarrheal disease, often from bad water. And you don't die from cholera, you die from the dehydration. So they figured out that the small bowel works great, but the colon is secreting all this fluid. So they designed a fluid that the small bowel would drink up like a sponge, and decreased the mortality rate significantly. With that knowledge, this is what we really teach our patients, and it's very important for them.
It sounds like a dietitian plays a huge role here, and there's not one diet that fits all. really depends on what's going on with each individual patient, what's left, what gut is intact. And then I think really important to pinpoint the importance of hydration and reducing sugars, which is interesting because it's kind of the theme of today's world is thinking of, low sugar this or avoiding sugars, and sugars are inflammatory, but it's fascinating how important it is in this world as well, and how that can lead to increased symptoms and, fluid losses. So fascinating here.
And like you said, we love our dietitians. We need them because it is a team effort, and teaching the diet is absolutely key, and working on fluids. And then we add medications. We call them bowel stoppers, things like commonly known as Imodium, or loperamide is the generic term, or another medication that we use is called Lamodal, which is diphenoxylate atropine. That's a little bit of narcotic tied in with a atropine molecule. And those work synergistically. Some people will say, well, gee, don't they do the same thing? Well, you can say, acetaminophen and ibuprofen do the same thing, right? Well, yes and no, but they work by different pathways. So these other two medications that slow the gut work by different pathways. So you get a synergistic 1-2 effect that really helps a lot of people slow down their gut so they have more time to digest, more time to absorb. The key element here is absorb.
You mentioned something about sugars. What about artificial sugars? Where do those play a role?
Artificial sugars we aren't keen on. It depends. If they're sugar alcohols and you still have a colon, those can actually cause more diarrhea. Things like sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol, and those are in a lot of sort of sugar-free items.
Yeah, those sneak in to a lot of products. You have to be really mindful of those.
Absolutely. So our patients really need to start reading the labels and understanding what they're really eating and drinking to benefit them. And we don't want to say you can't have this, you can't have that. No, we believe more in the yes diet. We want them to have stuff, but everything in moderation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a dietitian's role there, is just to expand someone's diet. I feel that we've been always given the name of the food police, and it's the opposite, really. We're just trying to expand people's diets, provide more nutrition, more nutrients, instead of being limiting.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want you as the team member to absolutely help them expand what they can have and say, yes, you can have a little bit of this, you can have some of that. Well, you've got to be a little careful about this. So that education is absolutely key to their success.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Kirby, it's not just about drinking more, though, too, right? Like that sounds way too simple. So I'd imagine that there's like a mix. You had mentioned the hydration, salt, sugar. Like it's all about balancing that out to making sure somebody's the right mix for what their intestine can handle.
Well, and it depends on their anatomy. So we will tailor what we sort of prescribe as a oral rehydration solution amount based on what that patient can handle and their response to it. But we find that it's not always easy to drink these solutions. Some of them are a little salty. There are some different proprietary things that are available that you can take a powder and just shove into water, and yep, that's great. We let them make it up themselves with water, salt, sugar, and a flavoring. They can do that. But if they then say, okay, well, I've got one patient who is absolutely addicted to coffee. I love my coffee too.
I understand
but
that.
If it's causing that much trouble, I'm going to cut it back a bit. But this gentleman has a pot of coffee every morning, and it took us 2 years to finally convince him that, gee, if you have a little less coffee and a little more of this other stuff, you might be in the bathroom a little less. And finally, he's got cut down to 2 big cups a day, and the oral rehydration solution doing much, much better. But, it takes time to get through to someone who's used to doing things a certain way, and it's not easy to change.
I think you make a good point. I mean, it's really meeting the patient where they're at. So trying to, provide as much resources, much guidance and nutritional advice, but really kind of have to meet them where they're at too.
Absolutely. We're not, like you said, we're not to be the police. We're there to help them, and we have to partner with them. We're not sitting there like Moses with all those wonderful commandments, where we're saying this might help you. Let us work together and find what works best for you that you can agree to and live with.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Kirby, in that note there, or on that note, you had mentioned just a bit ago that a lot of what you guys do, it depends on what's working in the gut, which is just it's a tough concept to wrap your head around. So the gut's obviously a very big place. So it sounds like what you see is if certain parts are affected or not working right, you just can't absorb certain vitamins correctly, or you have to change kind of how you're doing things to get the most out of what you're taking in.
Sure. Let me give you a couple of examples. If someone has a colon removed for whatever reason, has an ostomy created, we expect them to have 1 to 1.5 liters of stomal output. If people are having more than that, that's what we call high ostomy output. So what does your colon do? Think of the colon as a big sponge. It tries to reabsorb salt and water and actually kicks out a little bit of potassium. And certainly, it's a reservoir for stool. So at the beginning of the colon, what goes into the beginning of the colon is very, very liquid. And for most people, what comes out isn't really liquid. It's much more solid. And it may be even more solid the longer it sits in that colon. So the colon is doing its job by pulling out salt and water. The longer it sits there, the more desiccated it becomes, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a very nice way to explain that process too.
Well, try to use some ideas here. And then what happens if you lose parts of the small bowel? Well, yeah, we have about 12 feet of small bowel, or about 600 centimeters. 200 of that is the jejunum, and about 400 is ileum. So if you lose your ileum, you're not able to absorb magnesium well, because that's where the parking spaces for magnesium happen to be, and for vitamin B12 in particular, and some bile acids. A lot of what we break down and absorb is absorbed very efficiently up in the upper small bowel, called the jejunum. But the jejunum is not very smart. If you take out a lot of the ileum, it just keeps on doing what it's doing, and it doesn't get the hormonal message that, hey, there's nothing below me. I'm just going to keep working and doing what I'm doing. So unless you physically or from a medication standpoint give something that's going to slow the gut, the jejunum doesn't get it. So if you got to lose an area, lose a little bit of jejunum, because the ileum is much smarter. It can slow itself down with the help of some hormones, and has some other functions that the jejunum does not. So,
Dr. Kirby, I saw this map of the gut, and I thought it was amazing. It was fascinating. It showed each section of the gut and what it absorbs and what is digested in that section. And it's crazy to think there's so many different parts of it, so many different nutrients. And it's so hard to even pinpoint, to understand that or to gather that from a basic understanding. But when you see it that way, it's so essential, our gut to be functioning in every way. But, you can even target it to what area of the gut is being resected or you're having concerns or issues with, and you can target those nutrients and really replenish appropriately, which is really the most fascinating part.
Absolutely. I gave a medical student lecture this week on Introduction to Nutrition and Vitamins and Minerals, and showed exactly that picture with where different things are absorbed. And basically, imagine this. By the time you make the first turn around the duodenum, called the ligament of Treitz, you have 7 to 9 liters of fluid to absorb. 7 to 9 liters. And I got these really funny looks from the medical students
Wow.
going,
That's a lot.
really? Come on.
That's a ton.
So I had to explain. On most days, we take in about 2 liters of food or fluid, with the exception of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and maybe Super Bowl, a little bit more. And then salivary juice. We actually make 1.5 liters of salivary juice a day.
Wow.
Your stomach makes 2 to 3 liters of fluid to start the digestive process. Your pancreas kicks in another 1 liter to 1.5 liters of bicarbonate solution, pancreatic enzymes.
Practically a water factory.
Yeah. And then your gallbladder empties out about 500 milliliters. So again, by the time you hit that first big turn, you've got all that fluid that needs to be reabsorbed. And your gut is amazing. You can reabsorb all except maybe 100 cc's a day.
Wow.
So
that's impressive.
Just think of that. We have so much redundancy in that bowel that we can afford to lose some. And maybe we don't do quite as well when we lose some, but we're still able to meet our nutritional and fluid needs.
That really reinforces that thought of like we're made up of 70 to 80% fluid. It explains how that, that concept is true.
It is so true.
When we're talking about all this, and obviously your intestines need to be working correctly to make sure you're getting the vitamins and the nutrients out of your food. And Julia, I kind of want to ask you, because I know you kind of work with this a little bit more. Like, what kind of things do you see in people when they start getting these sort of deficiencies and they're just, they're not pulling in the nutrients that their body needs?
Right. So their body's showing them in different ways. I mean, we scan for malnutrition and different deficiencies, but just visually, you can look at things like hair loss, nails not growing, your skin being more dry and just not having the plumpness that it should normally have. You could see some hollowing out in the face, even though someone's weight might be normal. They may have lost weight or still be malnourished. You could see, more weakness, more muscle aches. So there's so many different symptoms. I mean, when you look at things like hair loss, one of the first things I think of is iron, and then when you think of, breaking bones, someone's having many falls and breaking little bones, and it's maybe not typical for that. And we think of calcium and protein, so vitamin D. So, we think of all these little ailments and things that are going on. They're little ways and signs that our body's telling us you're not getting what you need through your foods.
And Dr. Kirby, I take it these are all things you see in the people who you're treating, and these signs are all kind of there.
Absolutely. And we screen for them on a regular basis. And even the patients that we're giving IV nutrition to, though we're giving them IV vitamins and some minerals, it may not be quite enough. We may have to do additional supplementation. Again, we may not be giving someone IV nutrition 7 days a week. Our goal is to get them down to the lowest amount of support that they need, either IV or and really get them the holy grail, which is called enteral autonomy. So they're off the IVs. So yes, it's something that we see and we screen for in our population probably twice a year.
So essentially what we're trying to do is get their gut to work the best it can and to be able to eat foods and assimilate and absorb and get their nutrients through food, through their gut, through the use of their gut.
Absolutely. Totally correct.
Now, Dr. Kirby, how common is it for this sort of treatment? You adjust the diet, you make these sort of these changes, where people are able to get that gut going again, and maybe kind of no longer need the IV treatment.
Well, and that's the whole concept of intestinal rehabilitation, and that's what our group really does, where we're trying to reteach. Well, think about physical therapy. You're reteaching certain muscles to work. Well, we're trying to reteach the gut and use what's left and understand how well we can make someone absorb. But again, this is where the partnership with the patient comes in. They have to make the changes in their oral diet or their oral fluids to help themselves. And some people just don't do it.
When we were talking before the podcast, I was really struck by how you said you work hand in hand with dietitians in treating patients, and it's just so essential to the process. And it really kind of underscores kind of the whole reason we have a Nutrition Essentials podcast, which is to show that direct relationship between what you eat and basically your body functioning the way it should. And it sounds like that's really the point to kind of drive home here.
Absolutely. Think of the physician as the captain of the ship. Most physicians don't really have a good handle on nutrition. But if you partner with a registered dietitian and say, I've got a patient with high cholesterol, I need them to be on a low fat diet, a low cholesterol diet, I need them to be doing something that's heart healthy, maybe a Mediterranean diet. Yeah, I know the basics of a Mediterranean diet, so say the physician, but I need someone that can actually counsel them and give them particulars. So that's where the physician needs to partner with a registered dietitian for the benefit of the patient. And we do that with what we do, with the specific diet that we look at and try to tailor to a patient based on what they've had resected and what they can hopefully absorb.
And it's so specific. I mean, for what you do and your team, you're looking at specific areas of the gut that are resected and what nutrients and what percentage of calories are coming from carbs and fat and protein. And it does, it's very specific, very individualized. So the dietitian creates that plan of the, appropriate percentages and educates on the, importance to reduce sugar and to look for sugar alcohols and the importance of the oral rehydration solution. So really, I mean, it's a key role essentially in your area, really. And I thank you, Dr. Kirby, for valuing the dietitian so greatly.
Absolutely. If you're really smart and you learn very early in your medical career to appreciate the other members of the staff, dietitians, nurses, the secretaries, they're going to make your life easier. Again, we act like captains of a ship. We try to figure out globally how to help the patient, but maybe we don't have the absolute expertise to give the counseling that needs for a specific area. So when we're talking about patients with IV catheters and things, it's not going to be the physician who's going to be talking about the care of that. It's going to be a nurse. And again, diet and fluids, it's going to be one of our dietitians. So again, it takes a village. our whole team works together for the benefit of this patient population.
Now we've kind of touched on maybe the difficulties in somebody adjusting to this sort of diet. Julia, I know you work with so many different people. How do you kind of counsel somebody through, adjusting to these like kind of restrictions they might have to deal with, handling that, just, kind of navigating, maybe doing something they might not prefer to be doing, but they need to for their health?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to navigate through. For the patient, you try to put yourself in their shoes, and I do a detailed diet history, so I really get an understanding where they're coming from, what they're eating, their style of eating, how they're eating, who they're eating with, who's preparing their meals, who's purchasing the food, because all of those things play such an important role. Because we may need to include more people to get this plan to be successful. So you just do a good inventory, and then you see where the patient's at. You educate them on what's necessary, what they need to be doing. But really then your goal as a dietitian is to be able to take where they're at, where they need to be, and create a plan to get them there that is feasible for them step by step. It may look slower for one patient and faster for the other, but it's about providing them those detailed steps, the resources that they need, and be able to encourage them as well. So most people will feel better. So I try to use that a lot, in educating, well, listen, this is going to be hard. It will be challenging at times, but you will feel better. So it's really important you give it a try. And I try to go in small increments of change too. That helps.
That's where we can get to those amazing things that happen, like we were talking about right at the start with Dr. Kirby, and the things that happen in the office, the person getting up when they were in a wheelchair.
And I think some of the times patients just feel like their hands are tied. They feel like their health is completely determined by the doctor or the team. And I think when you think of nutrition and the food you eat, you control that. You control everything that goes in your mouth. So it gives the patient ownership. It gives them a say in what they're going to do and how they're going to eat. And we don't control everything. We just educate and provide the patient options. So it does give back some ownership.
So, Dr. Kirby, if somebody has intestinal failure, or they're just having troubles down low, and they need to get some things looked at, and there's some worries about what's happening there, kind of where do they start that process? Who should they go see? What's the overall process here?
Not an easy process in the United States. First, you need to check in with your primary care doctor usually. You may or may not be hooked up with a gastroenterologist that might be able to help you. Not every gastroenterologist wants to deal with nutrition issues, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's hard to believe. It seems kind of essential with it.
Yeah, ongoing debate on that. I really think that it's important for gastroenterologists who take care of the organs of nutrition every day to also know how to feed them. However, many other of my GI colleagues just go to the dark side, and they see that endoscope and, yep, I'm going to work on taking out polyps for a living and not think about anything regarding nutrition. And I'm sorry, that's very narrow-minded.
Yeah.
I think I like doing endoscopy. I've done endoscopy for 40 years, and I'm trying to stamp out colon cancer one polyp at a time. But I'm also telling those people how to decrease the risk of polyps by decreasing red meat and smoking and alcohol, and get some exercise. And if you're overweight, you need to be losing weight. And there's a certain degree of genetics in there. We can't minimize that.
Sounds like you're saying know your risk factors. That's really important.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
Know what those risk factors are, know what they are specific to you, and take actionable goals to reduce them.
Agreed.
So, Dr. Kirby, you had mentioned that in the United States, kind of the treatment options when you have intestinal failure are pretty low, and obviously at the Cleveland Clinic we have a pretty robust program. I just want to give you a second to kind of talk about what we do here and kind of just where we are with things.
Well, we actually have the largest home parenteral nutrition program in the United States. We have over 300 patients that are on home IV nutrition that we manage, believe it or not. That's more than some small countries in Europe. I can tell you that in Sweden they have 200 people in the entire country, and they only have one center that really does intestinal rehabilitation. In France, there are two. If you look at London, they have two in London, but people have to go to these centers for treatment. Easier to do that in Europe than it is coming from all over the country. We have patients that we see in 38 of the 48 contiguous states.
Wow.
We don't have any, well, I have had patients from Alaska, but nobody on IV nutrition presently, and I haven't had anybody from Hawaii. But the 38 of the other 48 states, we've had people that come to see us, and a lot that we still manage. So, yes, it's a big program. You can find these programs if you're lucky to have a program that has intestinal transplant. They're going to have an intestinal rehabilitation program associated with them. More on the East Coast and Midwest than the far West.
Well, I think it's safe to say we're glad that there's somebody out there doing it, and that you are so active in it. And really, it sounds like making some advances and helping people, figure things out and hopefully get off this IV therapy just by using nutrition and kind of working through that process. So thank you so much for coming in today. This has been just an absolutely fascinating discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kirby, for all that you do.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Julia, that was just a mind-blowing conversation. There's so much to unpack there. I'm still processing a lot of the things that we learned. It's going to take me a long time just to get past the notion that we have 12 feet of intestine inside us.
I know, that's so impressive, right? And I think the most valuable part that I got out of was the ownership that the patient or client can take in their nutrition and really helping heal their gut and get back to feeling their best self.
Yeah, it gets to what we talk about on this podcast all the time, which is how proper nutrition just does so much for the body. And you see it in everything. And I guess it makes sense that it's such a big deal when you're talking about your gut.
Absolutely. It plays such a key role. And, all those nutrients are absorbed and digested in our guts. So we really need to pay attention.
Without a doubt. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and liked what you heard, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Until next time, eat well.